Hi, I'm Acting Secretary of the Army, Patrick Murphy.
And I'm Nadia West, Surgeon General.
As we celebrate Women's History Month, we honor all women for their military and civil service.
Women continue to play a major role in shaping America's history, exemplifying our highest values as soldiers, DA civilians, and family members.
Women have proudly served the Army and our nation with distinction since our earliest days. We're currently in the longest wars in American history in Iraq and Afghanistan, where more than 1,000 women have been killed or injured in combat.
But we have made historic strides in 2015 with our first female Ranger School graduates.
And we can't forget you, General West, the Army Surgeon General, who's also the highest-ranking female West Point graduate ever.
Thank you, sir. And each of us succeeded, showing that women from all backgrounds and ranks are essential for a strong Army.
They're role models for future generations like my own daughter and son. Thank you for your selfless service and support for our nation.
In 2014, when First Lieutenant Dina Elisiebo earned her Army Aviator wings, she became the first female African-American pilot in the D.C. Army National Guard. Already certified to fly with an FAA commercial pilot's license, graduation from the initial entry rotary wing flight school at Fort Rucker, Alabama, placed her in an elite group of Army aviators. Reflecting upon her experiences in aviation, she stated, "When I think about the trailblazers who went before me and the adversity they continuously faced, be it gender, ethnicity, or simply doing what had not been done, I am grateful. I realize that I may not have a story had they not been inspired and laid the foundation." Some of the pioneers who laid that foundation were women like Bessie Coleman and Janet Waterford Bragg, two of the first African-American women to receive their pilot's licenses. These trailblazers led the way for countless others who had the courage, fortitude, and dedication to learn to fly. For Army aviation, women's contributions began during World War II, and pilots such as Willa Beatrice Brown pushed to break racial and gender barriers. Brown was active in the Civil Air Patrol and served as the coordinator of the War Training Service for the Civil Air Administration. She was also the director of the Coffey School of Aeronautics, which became critical in paving the way for African American aviators in the Army Air Force's program at Tuskegee Institute. Several qualified black aviatrixes applied to the Women Air Force Service Pilot, or WASP, program, which consisted of a group of women contracted by the military to ferry aircraft and train pilots. But none were accepted because of their race. It would be almost 3 decades later when the military would allow female aviators in its ranks. For Army women, the official invitation to sit in the pilot seat came in 1973, when then Army Chief of Staff General Creighton Abrams directed that women be trained as aviators. A few years later, in 1979, Lieutenant Marcella Hayes became the first African-American female to receive aviator wings in the United States Army. After graduating from the University of Wisconsin as the highest-ranking cadet in her class, Hayes was commissioned in 1978 and completed her helicopter flight training a year later at the U.S. Army Aviation Center. She served 22 years and retired as a lieutenant colonel. Many other women followed. Warrant Officer Janet Flowers was the first African-American female to graduate from the Warrant Officer Rotary Wing Aviator course at Fort Rucker, Alabama in 1982. A few years later, after the 1992 decision was made to open combat aviation to Army women, Christine Knighton was in command of a tactical combat arms unit in the 1st Cavalry Division at Fort Hood, Texas. Colonel Knighton went on to retire after a 29-year Army career. Lieutenant Colonel Rose Fitchett was the Army's first African-American flight surgeon. Her service was acknowledged by a South Carolina House resolution that recognized her 18 years of outstanding military service and then declared an official state, Military Women's Day, in November of 2011. The proud tradition of African-American female aviators continues today with the extraordinary service of women like Chief Warrant Officer Sheila Presley, who served as an attack helicopter pilot in Operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. This highly decorated soldier credits the Army with allowing her to live her childhood dream, to be an aviatrix. Just as Lieutenant Elisiebo is grateful for the aviators that laid the foundation for her, the Army Women's Museum proudly salutes the service of African-American female aviators in the United States Army.
The service of Hispanic women in the Army has a rich and diverse history that begins in earnest during World War II. Facing a two-front war and a critical manpower shortage, the Army decided to enlist women in the Women's Army Corps. These WACs, as they were called, would assume non-combat roles and thus free a man to fight. Hispanic women were among this pioneering group, with one special company formed in Puerto Rico. A WAC recruiting campaign on the island in the fall of 1944 resulted in 200 women being selected out of a pool of 1,500 for service in the Women's Army Corps. The entrance requirements were rigorous, and each woman was required to pass an exam which was entirely in English. Those selected represented many professions: teachers, office workers, translators, and even a lawyer. The majority of these Puerto Rican WACs were assembled into a unit that was flown by Army Air Transport to Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia, for basic training. There they also received specialized training as clerks and were then assigned to the Army Embarkation Post Office, located on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan, New York. When interviewed, these women emphatically voiced the pride they felt in serving and wearing a WAC uniform. Interestingly, many of the Puerto Rican women noted that they had never worn wool before, so their winter olive drab uniforms were quite a novelty. One aspect of life in World War II America was unfamiliar and discouraging to these women, that of a segregated society. Racial segregation was not practiced in Puerto Rico, yet when the 200 Puerto Rican WACs were selected, the darker complexioned women were separated and sent to Fort Des Moines, Iowa, to receive basic training with African American WACs. After getting out of the Army, some of these first Hispanic servicewomen went on to work with the League of United Latin American Citizens to fight for civil rights over the next decades. In honor of Hispanic Heritage Month, we salute the brave Puerto Rican women who answered the call and served in the Women's Army Corps during World War II.
On April 25, 2007, in Paktia, Afghanistan, insurgents ambushed Sergeant Monica Lynn Brown's patrol with explosives and small arms fire. The 19-year-old medic rushed to the aid of 5 wounded comrades, moving them to cover and shielding them with her body as the attack intensified and mortars impacted around them. Brown continued to provide aid under fire until the wounded could be evacuated. For her actions, Sergeant Brown became only the second woman since World War II to receive the Silver Star and earn her place in the proud history of the United States Army.
As a Black Hawk helicopter pilot in the Illinois National Guard, Lieutenant Colonel Tammy Duckworth was one of the first women to fly combat missions in Iraq until November 12, 2004, when her helicopter was hit by a rocket-propelled grenade. Duckworth lost both legs and part of the use of her right arm in the explosion and was awarded the Purple Heart for her combat injuries. During her recovery at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, Duckworth was one of the highest-ranking amputees and became an advocate for her fellow soldiers. Her leadership was recognized when she was asked to testify before Congress. Duckworth continued to serve as a major in the National Guard and became director of the Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs. There, she implemented many first-in-the-nation programs to address post-traumatic stress, improve traumatic brain injury screening, and reduce homelessness among vets. In 2009, she went on to the federal government, where she served as Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs. While there, she sought to improve the standard of care for vets and oversaw VA's first effort to end veteran homelessness. Duckworth also took the lead in initiatives for female vets and increased accessibility and accountability with the new Office of Online Communications. Lieutenant Colonel Duckworth comes from a long line of family members who have served this country and followed suit by joining the reserves in graduate school and chose to fly helicopters because it was one of the few combat jobs open to women at that time. Despite her injuries, she has declined a military medical retirement and continues to drill as a lieutenant colonel in the Illinois Army National Guard to this day.
Well, it was important for me personally to stay in because I wasn't ready to quit. I was always thought of myself as a lifer. I'd always planned to do 20 years. And when my Guard unit said, you know, even though you're severely wounded, there are jobs that you can still do where you can contribute. You know, it was just one of these things where I didn't want some guy in Iraq decide my future. I wanted to be the one to decide my future. So I'm grateful that the Guard continues to find a place where I can still serve and contribute to the mission.